Xtalks connects professionals in the life science, medical device, and food industries with useful content like webinars, job openings, articles, and virtual meetings to help you succeed in your career. This life science focused podcast brings together some of our editorial staff to share insights into the latest B2B industry news to keep you up to date. This week on the show, we are discussing Pharma by the Numbers, a retrospective look at the industry and 20 years of Xtalks history. Enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. I'm Sarah Hand, Editor-in-Chief at Xtalks.com, and this week I'm joined by Aisha Rashid, Sydney Perlmutter, and Vera Kovacevic. Thanks for coming today, everyone. So this is a bit of a different recording for us today because we're going to be talking about the history of Xtalks alongside some history of the pharma industry in general. So we recently published a blog article with an accompanying infographic all about, Pharma by the Numbers, a retrospective look at the industry and 20 years of Xtalks history. And just really wanted to celebrate the fact that we've been going for 2 decades and talk about some of the interesting things I found when putting this article together in terms of, how the pharma industry has changed and also really how it stayed the same over that period. So I'll start off by sharing some of our key stats at Xtalks. So we host on average 400 webinars a year, actually over 400. And we have an average of 2 speakers per webinar, but, as you all know, moderating some of these webinars, we often have, 4, 5, 6 speakers. So we average over 800 webinar speakers, expert speakers each year. And this is one thing that I was surprised to find. We actually have had over 5,000 openings on our industry-specific job board at different points in the past year. And yeah, if people haven't checked that out, that's a really great resource if people are looking to change positions. It's really easy to look for what your specific job title, that you're looking for is. Just to kind of toot our own horn, I guess, here in the editorial department, we have all created over 500 Xtalks Vitals videos. Over 100 of these Xtalks Life Science podcast episodes. Of course, we just celebrated our 100th episode a few weeks back. And we have over 4,000 pieces of editorial content on the site. And those are all, original pieces of content we've all written and a few select freelancers. So that's really exciting. What do you guys think about? I'm throwing a lot of numbers your way. What do you think about this? Like what we've been able to build here at Xtalks?
Yeah, well, just the fact that, there's millions of people going on our website and yeah, over 400 webinars a year. That's a lot. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of webinars. That's if you think about it, there's around 250 work days a year. So yeah, that's really a lot. And yeah, I found it interesting how you mentioned our industry specific job board. There's lots of different kinds of roles there. And I think an advantage of that is people can find, there's all sorts of like positions from entry level to like experienced, right? Mm-hmm. So people can go on xtalks.com and find really the job that's kind of not only interesting to them, but fits their kind of what they're looking for their career right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very proud of, the work that we've put in. I've been here for the past 3-ish years. So I'm very, happy to be a part of those, however many thousand articles that we've published and videos as well. And yeah, I we also moderate webinars. And even though I don't, have a background in science, I'm still so intrigued by the types of topics that, our speakers talk about. And it's just very cool to be on like this side of the industry and to get like a look into it. It gives me a lot of optimism, to be honest with you. I'm proud to be part of it.
Yeah, just echoing what everyone is saying. My gosh, I've also been here for 3-ish years. So Sydney and I started at the same time, right before the pandemic hit. So
2 weeks, 2 weeks before.
2 weeks before the pandemic hit. And so it's just been, wow, like what a ride, I would say, especially the first 2 years with COVID and just navigating that in our lives. And then also, in terms of presenting the information. I mean, I remember just almost every day there was some new update, obviously, just with so much of the unknown. And it was really, really important and really great to be on top of something that big in the life sciences. And so I was just really happy to be able to contribute to that in terms of on the editorial side. And then we also had tons of webinars, as you can imagine, all dealing with COVID, COVID preparedness, what comes now, what comes after. And I just remember everything was COVID. But at the same time, we were on top of other industry news as well. And we continue to do so. So it's just been really great. And I think our webinars are such a valuable resource for industry professionals because, really, the topics are so timely. And then some topics are so evergreen as well. And we really cover a breadth of subjects and areas from regulatory to, cutting edge innovations in biotech, gene therapies. There's just so much valuable information on our site. And I'm so proud and happy to be a part of this great company, this great team on the editorial side, to just, stay on top of all of these things and to, really try to bring value and quality to our readership, viewership. And that's the cool thing about Xtalks here. We have so many media formats as well. We're doing editorial in terms of written content. We're doing webinars, interactive webinars. We're doing videos. We're doing podcasts. And so it's really cool to be a part of all of that. And just really great, and hope to continue that and innovate on our side here as well.
For sure, yeah. And I think it's really apt that you brought up the pandemic and when you and Sydney started, because as our listeners can imagine, our business really grew exponentially during that time as, all of these physical conferences, things were going online. But one thing I wanted to point out is that because of our long history in the online events space, we were really well equipped to meet this spike in demand. We weren't really starting from zero. Obviously, there were a lot of online, conference companies and companies looking to get into webinars during that time. But I think it was really to our favor the fact that we had this experience and could really continue on being able to deliver for our existing webinar clients and make sure our attendees were still getting so much benefit while taking on an increased workload, from new clients and companies that maybe hadn't done a lot of virtual events before. So
absolutely, we were point that out. Very well positioned there for that, just being in the online event space. And so I think that really worked to our advantage, and also clients saw really the benefit of having these online events. And it's really great that Xtalks has been there in that space for the past 20 years. So really cool. And, our audience is very much a global audience. And so we actually have members from 95% of all countries. I thought that was a really cool statistic, because we think we write a lot. Of course, we're in Canada, but we write a lot for the US market. And, the majority of our audience, 54%, are in North America, but we have representation from Europe, South America, Asia, and then Africa, Oceania, and other is sort of another piece of that pie. I thought that was really cool that we're spread truly so globally. And another cool stat that we generated for this infographic, and I keep mentioning this infographic and article, that'll be linked in the show notes for anyone who wants to check it out. It's pretty cool. Every 20 minutes, a new industry professional registers for an account on Xtalks. So, our community is really growing pretty rapidly. I thought that was super cool. I love stats like that. I always picture somebody like anywhere in the world on their computer, every 20 minutes somebody's like clicking that register button and signing up for a new account and getting to join those webinars and read our content and things. So yeah, thought that was interesting. Couple other things here, and then we'll talk a bit about the pharma industry as well. But I'll get you guys to throw out some ballparks here, and then I'll share the number. How many hours of live webinars do you think were viewed by our Xtalks members in 2022, so last year?
Oh gosh.
How many hours?
Are we talking about live and pre-recorded?
This is just
live.
Just live, so it's not even the
Okay.
recorded webinars. Yeah,
Right.
that's a whole other one.
Well, you said there was over 400 webinars, right?
Mm-hmm.
Each webinar is typically an hour long.
I have my calculator out right now. I'm making a calculated guess right now.
Yeah. So I'm going to say 550-ish to 600, because some of them are...
And this
Yeah,
is,
I'm not sure we understand the question.
okay.
Not.
this is the number of hours of live webinars that were viewed. So this is adding up, like
all
if,
the views.
So even if it's one 60-minute webinar, depending on how many
Times
people
how many
joined.
attendees.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
This might be tricky. Maybe, what do you guys think? Do you want to throw it a guess, or do you want me to share?
Maybe you just share because it's hard for us.
It's not that hours like in that way.
Yeah, it's tricky. So we have 13,248 hours of live webinars that were viewed in 2022 alone. So that actually works out to 552 days of content, essentially, like continuous content. I thought that was wild. Our recorded webinars clocked in at 6,600 hours. So that's 275 days. I think that's really amazing. I think our archive webinars is a really not underutilized resource, but people are always registering for the live events, and we really have this amazing back catalog of recorded events that people can watch, on demand at any time for free. So that was pretty amazing. And just from our sponsor side of things, we've worked with 10 out of 10 of the top global CROs, and really we're the top choice for leading service providers and innovators across the drug development pipeline. And certainly Xtalks webinars have been a key vendor selection tool. So yeah, wanted to share that. And from the member side, again, we have professionals from top 20 big pharma companies, but also from, top 10 mid-size and small pharma and biotechs as well. So really, whatever the audience that people are looking for, it's definitely on Xtalks, and these people all have member accounts. So lots of cool stats there that we put together. Really excited to see where we go in the next 20 years for sure. So let's get into talking about how the pharmaceutical industry has changed in the last 20 years. So maybe we'll get started talking about the overall global value of the pharmaceutical industry. So in 2002, so this is when Xtalks started, the value of the global pharma industry was $400 billion. Any guesses as to how much that's grown to in 2022?
I'll start off as the rookie guesser here with very little knowledge. I'm gonna guess. So you said 400 billion.
Yep.
I'm gonna. Ooh, man. Okay. I'm gonna say it's at least doubled. I'm gonna say 800 billion.
Yeah, so actually it's more than doubled. The market value in 2022 was $1.4 trillion.
Wow.
So pretty crazy there. In 2012, so that midway point, it was sitting at 962 billion. So it had actually doubled in that 10-year period. And even when you account for inflation, the industry is still worth so much more now than it was, 20 years ago. And of course, a lot has happened in 20 years in terms of drug approvals and the way the industry has gone. But one thing I found really interesting is that in terms of the top 3 pharma companies by revenue, there's one company that has been in the top 3 at every time point I looked at. So in 2002, 2012, and 2022. Can anyone guess what that pharma company is?
Just think of COVID-19, guys.
Yeah.
Pfizer?
That's all you need to know.
It's Pfizer. Yeah. So in 2002, Pfizer was the number 3 spot. So number 1 in 2002 was Merck. Number 2 was Johnson & Johnson, and number 3 was Pfizer. Of course, all super recognizable names. But by 2012, Pfizer had actually usurped the other 2 to hit the top spot in terms of the top pharma company by revenue. Followed by Novartis in number 2, and then Merck in number 3 there. And fast forward again 10 years, in 2022, Pfizer was still at that top spot, and you can probably guess why. Vera alluded to it, developing the most successful COVID-19 vaccine, and we'll get into that in a minute as well. Followed by Sinopharm. So that's the Chinese vaccine company that developed that vaccine. I thought that was interesting in the number 2 spot. And then AbbVie in number 3. So certainly it's interesting to see the change in that 20-year period. But the fact that Pfizer was there in the top 3 was really interesting. And I did a little research into, maybe why that is, aside from obviously developing that very successful vaccine. And I think it's because Pfizer really continues to invest a lot into R&D, to stay competitive. Because as we see, it's so easy to be knocked off of that top 3 spot for sure. Any names in that top 3 surprise you? Or, they're all super recognizable, but...
Yeah, AbbVie having come up in the last 10 years, that's cool to see and not surprising because they do have the world's best-selling drug, Humira, which we've covered a lot at Xtalks, just in terms of the entry of biosimilars into the market and all of the controversy and accusations that have been hurled at AbbVie in terms of trying to block that competition. Right. So it's been really interesting to have followed that. But yeah, very cool to see how Pfizer has sustained its position. And I know there have been a lot of skeptics with the COVID vaccine. Oh, well, Pfizer's been making so much money off of it. Well, it's been making quite a lot of money even before that. So as we can see, so it's, I was actually surprised to learn that. How strong of a foothold it's had in the industry for the past decade. And, apart from COVID, obviously, and I think that's what made them well positioned to have, partnered with BioNTech and to really have gotten that COVID-19 vaccine to have really gotten that off and successfully as they did. So I think that really speaks to, like you said, Sarah, their R&D and just their commitment to delivering, products to patients and to people worldwide as well. So it's that's really great to see. And I mean, Pfizer is huge. They have they're in the gene therapy space, immunotherapies. Like, you just read so much about what they're doing and all of the different areas that they're working in. So yeah.
Yeah, and I also think Pfizer has been so successful because, like, lately in the news, you hear a lot of like acquisitions done by Pfizer.
Definitely.
Right? So,
yeah, good point.
yeah, like I read a stat, Pfizer has acquired 48 companies in total, including 12 companies in the last 5 years. Wow. So with all those acquisitions, and I mean, they obviously have like top people with these strategic decisions, right? So they obviously are making some good deals and some good decisions.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I think in acquiring those companies, they're getting all of the IP that's in development.
Yeah.
They're getting into other areas that maybe they weren't in before, and
Exactly.
being able to tap into the expertise of some of the employees of those companies. So they've made some smart decisions. Yeah, you're definitely right. Take in some of those profits and put them back into the company and into R&D to continue to innovate and stay on top, honestly. They also are, the brand behind some of the most recognizable drugs, and they've been around for 147 years. So drugs like Lipitor, Viagra, Celebrex, and Lyrica are all Pfizer drugs. I mean, I'm sure we've all heard those names, and I think a part of that is also their marketing efforts as well. Those are all ones I can think of that I've seen commercials for on TV, right? So yeah, definitely that's helped. Talking a bit more then about the top selling drugs over this 20-year period. So I took a look at the top selling drug in 2002, 2012, and 2022. And I don't think anything really surprised me here, but I want to see if you all are surprised. So in 2002, the top selling drug was Lipitor. So that's a Pfizer drug. That's a statin to lower cholesterol. And I think it actually received its biggest boost in sales when a study found it was linked to a lower risk of heart attacks among those with heart disease. So it was already a pretty popular drug before that, but after that, it seemed like everybody was on Lipitor to lower cholesterol. And in 2002, it actually brought in $8 billion for Pfizer. That's single SKU. So that's really significant for sure. In 2012, a bit of a different drug. The top selling drug was Nexium. So that's a proton pump inhibitor for people who have GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease, or just general reflux.
Acid reflux. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So it reduces stomach acid levels. And that's made by AstraZeneca and brought in $5.6 billion in 2012. And then I think you can probably all guess the top selling drug in 2022 was Pfizer and BioNTech's Comirnaty COVID-19 vaccine, and that brought in $29 billion in 2022. So certainly a big jump there. If you think 8 billion sounds like a lot for one drug, but of course everybody was looking to get vaccinated. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. And going back to a comment you made, Aisha, about some of these top pharmaceutical companies, the amount of money they're bringing in, it is significant. And I think people like to villainize this industry because of how much money they bring in, and because of a lot of the questions around drug pricing and the the cost of drugs going up over time, and it's certainly not unwarranted. However, it's getting more and more expensive all the time to develop new drugs. So really, gone are the days that you're just developing a small molecule drug and trying to get as many indications on it as possible, to have the broadest patient population possible. We're really shifting towards more personalized medicine. Like you said, cell and gene therapies. These are things that really target a very specific patient population. And because of that narrowing of the potential patient population, the drug cost really has to reflect that, along with things like, it's harder to manufacture these biologic drugs than it is just like a simple small molecule pill. Distribution is different. And of course, the R&D that goes into it, it's quite a lot more. So in 2002, the industry as a whole spent $68 billion on R&D. That jumped up to $132 billion in 2012. And then in 2022, that jumped up again to $238 billion. So, it's certainly on the rise. And so I think that definitely is reflected in new drug prices. What do you all think of those numbers that trending upwards?
Yeah, well, I think just the fact that you said we don't have, I still think a significant amount of drugs are still small molecules, but yeah, like more and more biologics are entering the market, and they just have to spend more money in R&D for biologic drugs. It's just more complicated on almost every dimension. So yeah, I do think that it definitely makes sense, like over time, that more and more money is being spent on total pharma R&D.
I'm curious to know how close or how far like R&D spending is in compared to like other spending, like marketing and like other things as well. I don't know if you like have those stats on hand.
Oh, that's
like
a very good
just a breakdown. Just because I remember like I've seen many like documentaries about either pharma companies or like the industry, and like at one point like or at least with one company, and I forget what it was, but like their marketing budget was like higher than their R&D budget, and just thinking like like that's interesting. Like, and then it made me start thinking about like the effectiveness of like the marketing, but it's like are the audiences like, should they be marketed to, or should it be more for, healthcare professionals to sort of quote unquote like sell these drugs? Like, yeah. So I'd be very curious to know like how far from or for, if like marketing budgets like outpaced even R&D. I don't know if that's true, but yeah, I'd just be curious to know about that. I mean, like, just because I think consumer awareness of drugs and drug names are becoming it's becoming a lot more. Like, I'm just a regular average person, and I feel like we know a lot more drug names and drug companies than we used to, and I'm not sure if that's just attributed to marketing or just like our general culture. But yeah, I mean, I was gonna make a guess for next year's top selling drug, and it's probably Ozempic or something.
Right? Yeah. That was a self-marketed thing on TikTok.
Yeah, TikTok, it did it for free,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I don't have those numbers, but I know that Big Pharma is one of the top ad spender consistently over time. So when you look at those numbers compared to other industries, they're right up there with the automotive industry and things like that. And I think it, even if I'm not mistaken, it did go up over the past few years, at least like over 2020 and 2021, because everybody was at home, during the pandemic. And so I think they figured they could get even more eyes on their commercials, right? So I think they invested more in that traditional ad space. I think that brings up another question too about, how much is pharma putting into different types of ads aside from traditional like television ads, because whereas a lot of companies have moved online, pharma's been a bit slower to do that, and part of that I think is the concern over compliance with making sure that they're showing all of the potential side effects of drugs and things. It's like a bit harder to do in, a social post as it is on a commercial where they can just have some nice music and someone running through a field and then a quiet voiceover, a very calming, quiet voiceover talking about all these potential side effects.
Suicidal thoughts and actions.
They can turn that into real. Come on.
Yeah. But, I know that pharma has run into some issues in the past few years over running up against the FDA with some social posts. Like I remember one with Kim Kardashian and Diclegis, which is like an anti-nausea drug for pregnant women. And she was, so this was like a few years ago now when she was expecting, and she was like promoting that on her Instagram. It was like very obviously like a sponsorship kind of thing, but she didn't have all of the information in her post about like potential side effects. And I know the company that makes Diclegis got dinged for that. So yeah, it makes sense that they've been hesitant to kind of move that way. But when I think of pharma marketing, I very much think of TV commercials.
Yeah.
You also just unlocked like a memory for me when I would like read magazines as a kid and like see print ads for like a birth control, let's say, and I would be asking my aunt like, what is this? And then the following page or half a page would be taken up by like the small text, right? And I don't even know what the drug is, but I think those definitely had their heyday. And there's still there's one birth control called Yaz that I remember always like seeing ads for like in magazines like Cosmo or whatever it was. But yeah, I think it kind of just like the marketing is reflective of like the culture of the time and when magazines were really big. And then not to say they aren't anymore, but they are even moving online too. But it's like, and even if all that small text is in there, it's like, who's really reading it, right? So it is really hard to communicate all the things you need to communicate in any form of an ad, right? But yeah, that doesn't surprise me whatsoever with Kim Kardashian, like especially when it's something like that's not just some like gimmicky like stomach tea, like or some hair growth gummy, like it's like I'm not surprised to hear that at all, but I don't remember seeing that ad.
It's definitely that'll be a topic for us for sure, I think, going forward, seeing how pharma changes its marketing tactics. And I think that's an interesting potential article to compare the amount they're spending on R&D compared to the amount they're spending on marketing, for sure.
Yeah, I know that with in the last couple of years, 2020 to 2022, pharma spent, I think, around 6.88 billion to just hitting 7 billion in advertising. So, and much of that has continued to be traditional television ads. And so, like the industry's been, kind of criticized for being maybe too traditional. But yeah, like Sarah, you said, it's a bit more difficult to regulate and to getting into the digital space. There are a lot of considerations there, especially in terms of if you have celebrities. Well, and that's not, out of the norm. I mean, you see TV ads with celebrities, a lot of pharma companies taking, partnering with celebrities for awareness campaigns and to promote specific drugs as well. So I think if it's, just the thing with social media is that, yes, it is a lot more deregulated and a lot more interactive. I think that's what makes it a whole different, ball game, because you have people actively engaging with your content, sharing, commenting, and so that's why that can get a little bit finicky and tricky, as we've seen with Ozempic, right? That was just it just took off from, I don't even know where that whole thing stemmed from.
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk was part of it, yeah. Kim Kardashian, a bunch of celebrities, yeah. But I don't know who was the one who really triggered that. Right. Maybe all of them just, started taking it for weight loss, and of course, it's indicated for type 2. As a type 2 diabetes treatment, and so a lot of issues happen there with shortages and things like that when it started being prescribed off-label, and probably a lot of other aspects in terms of why that those shortages happened as well. So yeah, it's going to be interesting how the pharma industry, which is pretty traditional industry still, is going to adapt to changing times in terms of how they market their products, and
yeah, for sure. So switching gears a little bit, I wanted to talk about the number of new drug approvals each year over the last 20 years. So starting in 2002, the FDA approved a combined total of 17 new molecular entities, or NMEs, and biologics license applications, or BLAs. So those are essentially for, traditional small molecule or like pharmaceutical drugs, and then those biologics. 20 years later, so if we're starting at 17 in 1 year, how many do you think were approved in 2022?
I'm going to say at least triple that number.
I was going to say double.
Okay.
And I'll say quadruple.
Okay. Yeah, so we actually had an increase of 64% to 37. So from 17 to 37 new drug approvals in a single year by the FDA.
Just over double.
Yeah. So pretty significant, though. And if we go back again to the early 2000s, there's been an overall upward trend. So between 2002 and 2004, there was really a steady rise in new drug approvals each year. So started at that 17 in 2002, went up to 21 in 2003, and then 36, a bit of a jump there in 2004. Bit of a drop in 2005, down to 20 drugs. And then the following 5 years saw more of a consistent number of drugs approved each year. So that was between 18 and 26. However, just past 2010, so in 2011 and 2012, the number of new drugs approved shot up again to 30 and then 39, respectively. So they were getting back to, or getting slowly up to the number that we saw in 2022. And then, interestingly, it seemed like for a few years that the drug approvals would just continue to climb every year. And they ended up reaching the mid-40s by the end of the 2015 fiscal year. However, 2016 was actually one of the lower years for new drug approvals. It actually fell nearly 50% over the previous year. I thought that was interesting, and so I went to look back, what happened in 2016. Was there another pandemic? I don't remember that impacted the FDA's ability to approve new drugs. It seemed like it was on this steady incline of approving more and more drugs each year. And I think certainly, drug makers were getting used to that and expecting the regulator to approve more each year. And I found some information from Dr. John K. Jenkins, who was the director of the Office of New Drugs at FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, or CDER, from the period of 2002 to 2017. And he said that really unrealistic expectations based on 2015's 45 new drug approvals, maybe at least partially to blame for 2016 having a lower number of new drug approvals. So he also said that there were 5 drugs that were slated for review in 2016 that were actually approved ahead of schedule. So they added to 2015's total. And 2016 also saw a 6-fold increase in the number of complete response letters sent to drug makers compared to 2015. And those letters required companies to take additional measures before the regulator would consider approval. And so Dr. Jenkins also went on to say that over 40 drug approvals in any given year would not be expected to be the new normal. And he said this in 2016. However, going forward, the FDA has really maintained this approval benchmark since 2017, with new approval numbers skyrocketing into the high 40s and even 50s every year, with the exception of the year 2022. So, from just under 20 new approvals in 2002 up to over 50 in the early 2020s. I mean, what do you all think of this jump? And is there anything you can think of that we could attribute this to, or do you think the FDA is just getting more efficient at reviewing new drug applications? Some people have said have criticized the regulator, saying, maybe they're not being as careful with new drugs as they were. Maybe they're not taking as much time to approve new drugs. What do you all think of that?
I think that's not true, that the FDA is not being careful, because, they must be expanding their staff like crazy, because there's, first of all, like, gene therapies are just coming out, right? And the FDA themselves, they said that they're getting like a couple applications a week for gene therapies. So it's just like there's different types of drugs. There's look what they're doing for the rare disease community, right? Like now pharma companies are really like focusing on more, I would say, their attention on like rare diseases, because there's incentives, right? There's like Orphan Drug Development Act, and the FDA is really giving incentives to like pharma companies to develop drugs for indications that they normally wouldn't have focused on as much in the past. So there's that. There's the fact that you have lots of different types of drugs now. It's not just small molecules anymore. And I think the FDA is expanding their number of staff to just keep up with the submissions they're getting, right? And I imagine they're going to expand their gene therapy department, for example, to keep up with the amount of submissions. So yeah, I don't think they're just like rushing through things. I think there's just a lot more pharma R&D now, and like probably the number of people in the US that are working for a pharma company, those numbers increase like each year, maybe every 5 years. So you just have like more people working in pharma, right? And you have more staff working at the FDA with each decade, I imagine. So I think that kind of is the reason why there's more drug approvals.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I think they've also just become maybe more efficient at reviewing some of these things, and taking a look at the like cost benefit analysis of new drugs, and not so much in terms of the price of a drug, but the cost as in, potential adverse effects. So I think they're really challenged with trying to get these new drugs into the hands of patients that need them, so that they can realize the benefits sooner, while also balancing the potential for side effects and negative effects. And I know, the regulator came under scrutiny during COVID because it seemed like the vaccines were approved so rapidly. But as we've talked about on this podcast and in our articles, the science was really already there, and they just sort of expedited things because we needed vaccines in that time. So I like to think it's the same thing in some of these other indications, particularly as you said, Vera, like some of these rare diseases and indications for which there is no other treatment currently available. I think maybe they've just gotten more efficient with reviewing these submissions, and you're right, there's sort of more different types of drugs being submitted. I don't actually have the number of total number of new drug submissions from 2002, let's say, compared to the number that were actually approved, so I can imagine that's gone up as there have been smaller biotechs and new companies that have been established in the last 20 years that are now developing in different areas. How many, I thought this number was really interesting. So in 2020, of course, the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, how many new drugs and biologics do you think the FDA was able to approve?
I heard somewhere that despite the fact that there was a pandemic, there was still like a kind of quote unquote normal amount of drug approvals, which I found surprising.
Definitely, yeah. So they actually approved 53 new drugs in 2020. Yeah, I had to do a double take when I was doing this research because I thought for sure that 2020 was going to be like the lowest year. When you look at the bar graph of this, I thought for sure it was going to take a major dip, because I remember reading and writing about how the FDA was obviously, struggling. They had their own kind of stay-at-home orders. They were having trouble sending their inspectors to manufacturing sites and things like that, right? And so, even though numbers then dipped a little last year to 37, that's still 20 more new treatments that were approved last year in 2022 compared to 20 years ago in 2002. So that's pretty incredible that they've been able to keep that up. And so, going back to what that former director of the Office of New Drugs said about how the fact that, over 40 new drug approvals a year would not be expected to be the new normal. I think at this point we do expect it to be the new normal, because it has shown to be over the last 5 years or so. And I think now it would be surprising, to be honest, to see less than 35 new drugs and biologics approved in any given year. So it'll be interesting to see over the next few years if the FDA is able to maintain that, if they're able to surpass that.
All right, yeah, so I think that's just a reflection of just how big the pharma industry is becoming and has become now. It's like a $1.34 trillion industry, so of course a lot of drug submissions coming through, and I think the FDA it's just contending with a lot more volume because of how big the pharma industry is now. And I think that that's just going to continue to grow. And during the pandemic, of course, even before that, you had at the FDA, like how Vera mentioned, different pathways. You have the accelerated approval pathway as well. Mm-hmm. So there are, several different pathways and programs that the FDA has to help expedite drugs, depending on the urgency at hand. And of course, we saw with the COVID-19 vaccines, that was quite a big matter of urgency to get COVID vaccines authorized, approved, and to the public. And I think that also showed us the capacity of the FDA to really expedite and to have more accelerated approvals. And I think, maybe back in the day, or even now, a lot of these regulatory bodies are accused of having a lot of red tape and a lot of constraints and unnecessary kind of a lot of bureaucracy as well, in terms of just how applications can, sit on desks for a while, and just everything involved in approval processes. And I think the focus is really on making things more efficient, along with having programs dedicated to specific indications areas and also urgency as well. So I think we are seeing shifts and changes definitely in terms of at the rate at which drugs are being approved. And I think it's a positive change. And I think, people might be concerned, are drugs being approved too quickly? But I think the perspective should maybe be drugs in the past were maybe being approved too slowly. So maybe that shift in perspective and context and everything comes into play. So I think, it's great. And I hope, the COVID vaccines, people have been saying that maybe, that will set a precedent for drug approvals in the future in terms of it can be done. There's no reason why the speed, exactly. There's no reason why a drug needs, it takes 15 years for, I think on average, for a drug to go through the whole development process through to approval. So cutting those timelines, that's definitely going to be a thing that we're going to be seeing in the future. And I think it's much needed. So good to see that change happening.
I think the FDA is going to have trouble keeping up with that in terms of in every single indication, if you know what I mean. There was certainly an urgency, as it should have been, put behind the approving the COVID vaccines. But I think even at the time they were quick to say whoa, unless you're developing a COVID vaccine right now, don't expect this to be the new time frame for your drug approval. But certainly, I think it's good if it's going forward. And I do hope, as you were saying, Aisha, that they identified maybe some points, some rate limiting steps in that approval process that
to make
could
things
be
more efficient.
That could be removed or just changed in some way. To get drugs approved faster. So just quickly here, looking forward to some of the challenges in the pharma industry and what they'll be facing in the coming years. So certainly one thing we've touched on is pressure to get drug costs under control. That's really been steadily building in the U.S. for at least a decade. There's been a 20% increase in the average launch price for new drugs every year since 2008, and that's according to a research letter published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And the letter also reported that mean launch prices of drugs increased 13% every year, even when drug characteristics were adjusted for, so such as biologics versus small molecules.
Are we adjusting for inflation?
That's a good question. I think so. I think that 13% as opposed to the 20% is adjusted for in terms of the characteristics of the drugs and inflation. But it's still a substantial increase. And nearly half of all new drugs launched between 2020 and 2021 came with a price tag of $150,000 per year or more. So there's certainly, that's not going away anytime soon. The debate over drug costs, and as we've talked about today, there's significant R&D expenses that go into these new drugs, and there's a lot that goes behind that list price. And of course, something, we haven't even touched on, and there really isn't in this particular episode of the Life Science Podcast, this idea of, who's paying for that, and insurance companies and everything. And then in addition, there's increased competition from generics and biosimilars that has also prompted widespread change within the industry. And in the past few years, we've seen a few biosimilars being granted interchangeable status. So innovator pharmas are having to do more to ensure that their product is the one that's filled at pharmacies. So that's another thing that's challenging the industry as well. But overall, I think we have a pretty optimistic outlook here, and certainly at Xtalks, I look forward to continuing to cover all of these major happenings within this industry. In this article, we didn't even touch on some of our other verticals, so the medical device and the food verticals that we cover too. But I think it's just so interesting to see in the 20 years since we've been around and doing these webinars, all the changes in this pharma industry.
Yeah, definitely. Looking forward to more changes to come. And Sarah, great piece that you put together with that infographic as well, just highlighting some of the major milestones and where Xtalks has been throughout, just being on top of everything and continuing to be on top of the latest happenings in the industry. So yeah, great piece.
Thank you. Thanks, Aisha. Well, that is the end of this episode of the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. If you like today's show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. If you enjoyed our discussions today, please share the episode with your friends and colleagues, and be sure to subscribe in order to be notified when a new episode is released. To join in on the discussion, you can find Xtalks on social media. Email podcast@xtalks.com or comment on the articles directly. Links are in the show description. Take a moment to join our community at xtalks.com to get access to everything we have to offer, including webinars, job listings, virtual meetings, articles, and more. The views and opinions expressed in the podcast are those of the speakers sharing them. They should not be taken as professional advice and do not necessarily reflect the policy or position Honeycomb Worldwide. For further information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.